Theorist Anthony Giddens' theory of the reflexive project of self states that adolescents each face the task of inventing themselves, of deciding who they are and what they want to be. These are the stories of Lara and Ruby, each reflecting on their transition from high school to Griffith University in late modern society.
Hello, my name is Lara. I was born and raised on Norfolk Island in December 1995. Norfolk is a small island in the Pacific Ocean located between Australia and New Zealand. It has a population of approximately 1,600. Norfolk only has one school with a population of 300, and this is where I sat my high school certificate. Moving away from such a small, tiny island with a small community where I had such a strong sense of localism and belonging into a country with a vast community and culture was a massive change. Norfolk for me is defined by the emotional and psychological levels of home. I believe and will always believe home is where the heart is. I consider myself as being an attached lever as I have intentions of going back to Norfolk Island later on in life. I challenged my cultural capital in deciding to attend Griffith University, as most young people on Norfolk go straight from school into the workforce. I wanted to work towards my agency of teaching, and so by reaching this goal, I made the decision to come 1,416 kilometres to university to further my education and increase my social capital. However, leading up to this decision were a series of critical moments, each attributing to my reflexive project of self. The first of these were: when I was 10, my mum and dad went through divorce. In early adolescent stages, divorce can be quite traumatic for any child. This brought about big changes in my life as I had to move back and forth from one home to the next until eventually staying with my mum to help with my education. It was difficult permanently staying with just one parent, but because of the smaller community, it was easy to reach out and be with my dad. Although life was quite different, it all started to get better once I turned 13. My other critical moment in my life would be late last year. One of my good friends perished in a car accident. Because the community is so small, it becomes more comforting to grieve, as we all felt the same and were so close, and made things a lot more easier to cope with. But when it came to my schooling, the accident and the grief which came with it played as a huge distraction. Dealing with grief and my study for the HSC wasn't a good combination. I found after my episode of grieving I couldn't find my feet to study normally. I didn't get the required grade for my course in a Bachelor of Education, so I decided to enrol into a Bachelor of Arts and defer into education the following year. Since moving to the Gold Coast, I have increased my social and cultural capital through education and social networks. Although I do not call the Gold Coast my home as such, it is still a physical and practical resource. As I consider myself an attached lever, I do not identify as being cosmopolitan. My transition into Griffith University so far has been very nerve-wracking but exciting, stressful but fun, and just exhilarating, and I look forward to my future that awaits me.
Hi, my name is Ruby Manson and I am a student at Griffith University. I live at home with my mother and brother and everything is great, but it wasn't always that way. I had to endure many critical moments to reach this lifestyle. In 2008, I started high school, which is a very stressful and scary time for any fresh teenager, but it was a little more difficult for me. In February that year, my mother finished work and brought me home from school. We discovered that most of our furniture was missing, and my father had abandoned us after being married to my mother for 25 years to continue his affair with a lady from work. At the time, I was in a state of shock and didn't feel I had much of a reaction to this, but looking back now, I realise it caused a lot of issues throughout my adolescent years. Within months, I had mentally lost my mother to alcoholism. This made it really difficult to study, to sleep, and to generally keep myself from mentally deteriorating. By the time I was 16, I moved out of home, as it had become unreasonable and was very negatively affecting me. During this time, I moved schools and eventually dropped out in the final term of Year 11 to commence full-time work in a fast food restaurant. I considered myself a detached leaver, as I had removed all contact with my family for almost a year. During this time, I gained a sense of independence, however, lacked a physical and emotional attachment to home. Through moving out of home, my social mobility greatly increased. However, physical mobility was limited as I didn't have my driver's license. During this time, I was a very unhappy person. I felt a piece of me was missing and turned to heavily drinking alcohol in the hopes to numb my emotions and suicidal thoughts. Eventually, through a deep reflection of my project of self, I realised this was causing more harm than good and found a whole new sense of peace: writing. Putting my feelings onto paper was the best release I'd ever experienced. Shortly after, a friend I was living with picked up my journal and told me I was truly talented at something I felt passionate about. At this moment, I decided this was the future I wanted for myself. I spent many hours crying with my mum and grandmother, begging them to forgive me. Since that moment, they have done nothing but support me, and I discovered the love I felt back at home made living anywhere else a mistake. I then decided I would return to school and complete Year 12 with the intention of reaching university and studying all the beauty within writing and literature. Over the 2-year senior period, my mother and I had many disagreements, and I was independent through most of my senior years. It was because of this that I received special consideration with most of my work, and through support from teachers eventually received the mark I needed. Shortly after turning 18, I experienced yet another critical moment. I received a phone call from my father for the first time in over 5 years. We organised to meet up in the hopes of putting the past behind us. However, I wasn't satisfied with the meeting. He was a complete stranger to me, except for little ways in which he was the same awful person I had remembered him as. This meeting inspired my mother to finally quit drinking, and from that day onward we had lived together in complete happiness. Here I am, back at home with a bright future ahead of me. I could not be more happy or proud of myself.
These are the stories of two girls whose critical moments led them to studying at Griffith University.